My name is Dr. Aris Thorne. For the last 4 months, I worked alone at a seismic research post deep in the Yukon territory, over 400 miles from the nearest human settlement. The silence was absolute, a heavy, crushing vacuum. My routine was strict. Check instruments, check the perimeter. The only sound was the anxious thump of my own heart in the metal cabin, surrounded by endless, pristine white tundra. 3 days ago, I found a break in the snow. It wasn't a bear or a wolf. It was a single line of enormous, deep indentations, over 15 inches wide, spaced impossibly far apart. The print was a grotesque, three-toed shape, vaguely like a massive human hand pressed down with immense force. The creature that made it would have to stand over 10 feet tall. I felt the first primitive spike of fear. This anomaly broke every rule of the natural world. My panic intensified. I raced to the reinforced perimeter fence. About 50 yards east of the cabin, the fence was ripped open. The heavy steel mesh was torn clean through, not cut. There were no tracks leading away. Even more chillingly, a piece of thick, synthetic weatherproofing had been crudely draped over the tear, attempting to conceal the damage. It wasn't an animal. It was a clever, calculating hunter. I locked myself inside the cabin. That night, the wind died, and a new sound began. It was a low-frequency thrum that vibrated through the floorboards and into my bones. My seismic instruments spiked wildly, charting a massive subsonic pressure wave. It felt less like a sound and more like a massive, organic drumbeat echoing from deep beneath the earth, originating less than 100 yards away. Hours later, the thrum cut out, replaced by a perfect, agonizing imitation, a woman's voice, thin and strained, calling my name. "Aris, can you hear me? The storm, I need help." I knew it was a lie, but the voice sounded exactly like my long-dead sister. The creature was weaponizing my grief and compassion, trying to lure me out by tapping into my deepest emotional memories. I covered my ears, fighting the terror. My refusal to open the door was the trigger. The voice stopped, and the cabin roared as something massive hit the outside wall. The heavy steel bar across the door bent visibly. Then came the sound of massive, stone-hard talons tearing through the insulation, scraping against the inner metal sheeting. This felt like a professional, purposeful attack aimed at structural failure. I grabbed my rifle, knowing my defenses wouldn't hold. The monster tore a hole near the ceiling. I fired blindly. The light hit something horrifying. Pale, wet, almost translucent skin, stretched taut over massive, bulging muscle. It was completely hairless. As it pulled back, a single, impossibly long claw, thick and curved like a black scythe, swept past the opening. The scream that followed my shots was a high-pitched, metallic shriek, like rusty industrial machinery tearing itself apart. I knew my only chance was the emergency shelter. As I threw open the bent door, the entity's massive, three-clawed hand was waiting. It slammed down on my right forearm. I heard the sickening, grinding crunch of bone and felt the searing pain as the force ripped and partially crushed the muscle and flesh. I screamed, pulled my arm back, and saw a sickening smear of gore left behind on the bent steel. The pain was absolute. Adrenaline took over. I plunged out into the dark. A sudden, blinding whiteout blizzard rolled in, dropping visibility to 0. The monster followed, making a series of ragged, wet, hissing sounds. I ran blindly, holding my shattered arm, letting the blizzard, my only shield, envelop me before doubling back to the tiny, nearly buried emergency bunker. I activated the satellite beacon inside the bunker. Immediately, the mimicry began again right above the hatch. Now it was Michael, my calm, professional supervisor. "Aris, come up now. We got the signal. We need to check your injuries." It was a perfect, deadly lie. I stayed silent, listening to the monster use a comforting, familiar voice to lure me into the open, confirming it was still a thinking, malicious hunter. 12 hours later, the rescue helicopter arrived. As the medics pulled me onto the stretcher, I looked back at the shredded cabin. Standing beside the wreck was a tall, pale figure. It was facing the helicopter, and for one terrifying, final second, I heard a new sound through the rotor's roar. A soft, satisfied chuckle, purely, profoundly malicious. It wasn't the sound of defeat. It was the sound of a hunter who knew the chase was merely paused. I lost my arm. The crushed tissue couldn't be saved. The official report cited a grisly attack and dismissed the sounds as equipment failure and delusion. They sealed the files. I received a prosthetic arm and a prescription for sedatives. They tried to erase the truth, but the trauma of my missing arm and the memory of that perfect, professional voice calling my name can never be erased. In the hospital, the FBI eventually took interest, linking my story to other strange disappearances of isolated researchers. However, the evidence was insufficient. They found the shredded cabin, but the blizzard had erased the tracks. They cited the grisly attack in the official report, noting the unusual size of the wounds, but dismissing the seismic spikes and the mimicry as panic-fueled delusion from an isolated man under extreme stress. The truth was sealed away, buried under bureaucratic paperwork and the inability of science to classify the primitive fear I faced. I now wear a high-tech prosthetic arm, a constant, cold reminder of the predator that nearly claimed me. I received a settlement and live in a quiet, small town, surrounded by people, yet more isolated than ever. The doctors couldn't save the crushed tissue. I have permanent, discolored gray scars on my shoulder where the force impacted. The most horrifying part is the knowledge. The mimicry proved the thing is intelligent. It didn't want a quick kill. It wanted to hunt and torment. I check the news obsessively. Whenever there is a massive, unexplained power outage across a remote, isolated area, a cold sweat breaks out on my brow. I know the official story is a lie. The apex mimic is not bound by boundaries or blizzards. I am constantly terrified that somewhere, someone is hearing a familiar voice calling their name from the darkness. And I know, with cold certainty, that the sound of Michael's calm, professional voice is waiting to resume the hunt for me, whenever the silence allows it. The hunt is merely paused,